The chance to shape your future is here. Learn and connect with exciting new opportunities. Are you ready for the next step?
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's panel on AI in action. Joining me today, we have an excellent selection of panelists from a wide variety of AI backgrounds, and we'll spend 5 minutes introducing ourselves. Then we'll have about 40 minutes. This is an hour-long session, so we'll have about 40 minutes of discussion, and then we'll have the last 15 minutes for Q&A from the audience. But if you have any burning, pressing questions, feel free to ask them as we go, and I'll farm them out as we go, as the opportunities arise. Right, without further ado, I'll introduce myself. My name is Seamus Ballard-Smith. I am the lead data scientist at CMET. CMET, in short, we support Welsh SMEs with the creation and adoption of emerging technology through funded collaborative research projects, which in a nutshell boils down to we sit between the emerging technology and the private sector. So we try and fill in where the private sector hasn't developed that capacity to help yet. Let's go around the room. Alyssa, welcome. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Seamus. Hi, great to be here with you all today. I'm Elisa Pritchard from Grey Parrot. I'm the head of marketing and operations. And just very quickly, at Grey Parrot, we use AI computer vision to automatically detect and characterize waste composition. So waste has many meanings, waste being, PET bottles, PP cans, cardboard, fiber, and so on. And basically our AI vision system is used on moving conveyor belts in recycling facilities to analyze these large waste flows to basically monitor, audit, and sort waste at scale.
Perfect, thank you. Ben, how about yourself?
Thanks, Seamus. My name is Ben Holland. I'm the CTO of Antiverse. Antiverse is a startup based in Cardiff. We are working and using machine learning to optimize and develop the drug discovery process. So we can discover new antibodies, that's a particular kind of drug molecule, faster and better, and our long-term vision is to discover antibodies that can't yet be discovered in order to treat diseases with fewer side effects or diseases that can't yet be treated at all.
Fantastic, thank you. Jeff, yourself.
Oh, hello there. My name is Jeff Francis. I'm the CEO and founder of Breathe Music. Breathe Music is a Cardiff and London-based AI music tech startup with a world-class consortium, including a research partnership with Queen Mary University and the Digital Catapult. We have been successful in raising significant funding and recently have launched the first of 2 investment phases for the year. What are we doing? We are developing disruptive technologies that significantly improve on current music audio recognition algorithms, employing groundbreaking AI technologies to identify live performances and official online covers, as well as commercially released songs. Our focus is on identifying the song rather than the official recording so that music creators can be paid fairly and accurately. We're developing technologies to do this where AI is the enabler. We train neural networks to do this. So just very briefly, think about the song Imagine. Now, imagine the jazz version of Imagine, the grind version of Imagine, the drum and bass version of Imagine. Now imagine how many versions of Imagine there could be. Our technology will identify them all, irrespective of how the songs are interpreted. It will tell the platforms and collection societies that these are all versions of John Lennon's Imagine. Our solution is for music rights owners, the music industry's collective management organizations, as well as venues and digital service providers. It ensures music is identified and evidenced wherever it is played. So we track what gets played so that every music creator gets paid. Thank you.
Marvelous. And last but not least, please, Martin.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Martin Braswell. I'm the founder and Chief Executive of Ingot, and our speciality is in dealing with intellectual property identification, rating, and valuation. The primary application for the tools and the platform that we have, which operates primarily online, is to assist companies to leverage the value of the investment that they've made in generating intellectual property, which might be through debt or equity finance. We've been working with CMET to look at the applicability of artificial intelligence techniques, particularly neural networks, to help us identify patents in particular that are likely to have significant value based on common characteristics with patents of known value. So that's my primary area of interest in this subject matter.
Okay, thank you very much all. Welcome. Let's start with Ben. Ben, tell us how you're applying AI to this very pertinent world of drug discovery.
That's a great question. Thanks, Seamus. I'll start with a few words about what drug discovery is. That's a key part of the process of finding new medicines. Drugs are just molecules that interact with molecules in our body to have a desired effect. Maybe they stop a particular process from happening. Maybe they make it happen faster or slower. That all depends on the disease. Unfortunately, drug development is expensive, and it's getting more so. It currently costs over $1 billion to develop each new drug, and then only about 10% of them actually make it to market. That's a very expensive lottery ticket, in my view. The overall drug development process is, number one, you find a molecule that's suitably involved in the disease. Number two, find a drug molecule, interacts with it in the right way. Number three, you test it on cells, on animals, on humans, and that's the clinical trials that everyone talks about. And then you make it and distribute it. Where Antiverse fits in is that second step of finding the drug molecule, and that's called drug discovery. A common analogy would be finding a key that fits in a particular lock. Only with biology, both the key and the lock are made of jelly. So it's even harder than you think. Picking the right disease molecule and then the right drug molecule largely determine whether you're going to make it to market or not. So discovery is one of the critical steps.
Okay.
So why are we using AI for this? What do we actually do? Antiverse is a company that works with antibodies. That's a term everyone is unfortunately now very familiar with. Almost all the other AI for drug discovery companies you'll hear about, they work with small molecules. That's aspirin would be a classic example. That's the other kind of main class of drug molecule, and they're small. They're a couple of dozen atoms. Antibodies are, by comparison, are big. They're kind of 25,000 atoms, so much bigger. And I might be biased, but I think antibodies are wonderful molecules. They've been around for millions of years, and your immune system is making them right now to fight off invaders. If you can find the right one, it will stick really well to what you want it to and not to anything else. It's a great key for your luck. But the trouble is that step of finding the right one. Antibodies, as I said, are big, they're floppy, they're complex, and they're made of thousands of atoms. And there are unimaginably many potential antibodies out there. There are more antibodies than there are grains of sand in all the deserts of the world and all the beaches. There are more antibodies potentially than there are stars in the universe. And actually, that's where Antiverse's name came from. It came from antibody universe. And that's where AI comes into play. We use machine learning because, well, the systems are too complex to solve explicitly with equations. We do actually know a lot about antibodies, and we can make lots of data about what works and what doesn't. So that's a great fit. We distill that scientific knowledge along with the results of hundreds of thousands of experiments into models that predict how antibodies stick and to what. And so that's kind of the fundamental technology of Antiverse, a real understanding of antibodies as a molecule and how they interact with other molecules. At the moment, we're working with major pharma companies to better understand the experiments they already do. There are standard ways of discovering antibodies, and those usually involve making billions of them into a test tube and screening those against the molecule you want it to stick to and trying to select the ones that stick. And then, of course, you've got to analyze them for safety and all of those things. So we take the data from those experiments people already do, and we pick out the needles in the haystack, the antibodies with the best chances of making a great medicine, but that otherwise might have been missed with the current processes. And that's kind of been enabled by the recent development of machine learning and what's called next generation sequencing. So we can screen thousands of times more molecules than we could have done before. 10 years ago, this wouldn't have been possible. And So that adds great value to companies at the moment. We help them get better medicines. We get data to train our models. Everything is a kind of positive feedback loop. And we're contributing somewhat to getting better medicines out there. But the vision of Antiverse is to discover antibodies against target molecules where it's not really an option to do lab-based work. There are some really exciting molecules that could be transformative for certain diseases that are just almost impossible to work with in the lab. So once we've trained our models, we can work with these purely in silico and discover antibodies against them. That could open up a huge vista of new diseases to be treated and new approaches to treating existing diseases with fewer side effects. I mean, our work is great. It's interesting, it's fun, it's exciting. We've got a great team here in Cardiff, but it's that idea of making a difference to people that really drives us.
Marvelous. Well, thank you very much for that. Martin, I'm going to switch to you now. I imagine some people don't know very much about patents. Can you tell us what is a patent, and also how are you using AI to create value for businesses?
So a patent is one of the ways that intellectual property law offers to protect something that you've invented or created. Patents very specifically deal with inventions, things that have a technical effect. In order to get your patent, you have to prove a number of things in terms of whether, for example, it's novel compared with other things that have gone before, and also that it's inventive, in other words, that it's non-obvious. So in our day-to-day work with companies where we're analysing portfolios of patents and other types of IP rights, or even unregistered intangible assets, we use a lot of data and we apply a lot of algorithms to it. But really what we want to understand is what the connection is, particularly between intellectual property value and commercial utility. And this is especially important if we want to do where we're really heading for businesses, which is to be able to use the intellectual property to underwrite a collateral value. In other words, something that you can generally borrow against in the expectation that it will be worth something at the end of the day. So patents are a particularly rich and complex data source. They're constructed of lots of different fixed things. They will have dates, they will have territories associated with them. You can tell what their status is, you can tell when they've been renewed, for example. But they also have a lot of other inputs which we felt may be predictive of their utility. Obviously, they're context sensitive, which we have to process in another way. But in particular, they have descriptions, they have claims, they have drawings. And depending on the way that the patents are constructed, that can have an awful lot of an impact on whether they end up actually being worth anything. For example, do they protect an invention that's very, very narrow and specific to a particular company? Or are they dealing more with an area of basic science where their applicability could be really broad? And actually, the most valuable patents are usually somewhere in between the two. So we worked with CMET to try and isolate what the characteristics would be that we could discover from the US patent data set. An awful lot of patents, as James will recall, dealing with all patents basically since the year 2000. And we independently researched a lot of indicators of commercial utility. We converted those into a project where I think we ended up with something like 36 different nodes that we mapped out. And we were really seeking to understand, is there predictivity, if you like, in the characteristics of these patents? Is there actually a relationship that can be mapped out using AI techniques between the composition of the patents and whether they ultimately ended up to be commercially useful? And then secondly, how predictive is it and which elements of it are most predictive? So we're still in a relatively early stage of our journey with AI at the moment, but what the CMET project has really given us is confidence to continue progressing down that route, because we have clearly identified aspects of patent characteristics and construction that have a clear connection with that ultimate usefulness.
Thank you. Nice of you to say. Okay, so from patents to music then, Jeff, tell us about how you're using AI to help performers.
Okay, well, it's not just performers, it's music creators in general. So currently, I suppose you could say one of the most well-known music algorithm, which is a B2C algorithm is Shazam. Shazam recognizes recorded music. It's very, very good at what it does, over 99% accurate within seconds. But for Shazam to recognize a piece of music, it has to have actually seen the original file previously. So you're in the studio, you're making a track, you're mixing, you're mastering, and then somebody in your team will upload to Shazam, or there's lots of different types of Shazam companies out there. So that's great. So if you're in a pub or in a restaurant, you hear a bit of music, you can actually press your app and you can identify that music very easily. But even in the case where, say, maybe a Queen song from the 80s has been digitally remastered, that would have to be re-Shazammed because the Shazam algorithm, which uses no AI in its core algorithm, is sensitive, too sensitive. So in a live environment, by the very nature of live, it means that every performance is slightly different. So a live performance will score 0 on Shazam. So this is a very difficult area of music recognition. And so, for instance, on radio, there's systems to monitor international numbers, international standard numbers. A lot of the time, that's not possible because there are no sort of numbers, metadatas in the track. So the likes of Shazam can recognize very well pre-recorded music. But in the live environments, and over a third of the content on the likes of YouTube just simply cannot be recognized. So literally billions and billions of dollars of revenue is either not paid out or paid out fairly, or is hanging around in a bank. Spotify in America, for instance, in just America, they have about $500 million at any one time in the bank. They can't use it, but they can't find the music creators who've made the music. Wow. Well, probably about nearly 2 years ago, I developed a concept actually on paper, you could say. And I can't say too much about the concept because we're actually putting up our first patent through in the coming months. So basically what it does, it uses neural nets. And so it doesn't just use brute, you can get so far when you're solving problems with AI, but just by using lots of compute power, lots of algorithms. So that's an interesting point to mention CMET. So about a year ago, I was sort of building my team and resources and my university collaboration at Queen Mary. And at the time, we were recruiting a postdoctoral at Queen Mary to start the project. So I previously got in touch with CMET, and they actually gave me a call and said, right, somebody's dropped out. They can't provide us with the data. Do you have your data? And do you want to jump in? I think we started the project in just over a year ago. And so although we only used a very small data, a very small data set compared to what we're using now, we were able to do make it about 3 milestones. So the first thing that we discovered, so my model, what it wanted to get out of the music data, we proved with CMET, we proved that was categorically possible. So that was the first eureka moment.
Yes.
I think it was the 7th of February, if I remember rightly. So, and then later on, we showed with the help of CMET that my solution was possible by using deep learning neural networks, which was great, but not totally sort of breathtaking in terms of this technology. So the third thing I think that really made the difference is that applying my methodology, my concept to just using general compute made a significant difference. So since then, so I've been working closely with our partners at Queen Mary, and we're now at a stage now where our MVP, which it will be ready fully by sort of June, we're already getting much higher metrics than probably the best in the market at the moment, which is Google. So things are going really well in that sense.
That's
so
very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jeff. We do have an audience question for you there, which is how does your process cope, if you know at the moment, how does it cope with bands who gradually blend their tracks together? Have you got any data on that?
Yeah, I suppose the whole concept is based on, so you think of a piece of music, say, Hey Jude. So however you interpret your music live or recorded, it'll be able to extract the essence and say, you know, it's that piece of music. For instance, imagine you're in a pub and there's a singer playing Hey Jude vocals on the guitar, playing not very well in reggae form. Now, you will still probably know as a human with your hearing that, you know, that's Hey Jude, albeit very badly played. But our system will be able to identify that music as Hey Jude and then extract the evidence for the reporting so that somebody can collect the royalties. So whereas Shazam will have, you know, literally zero chance of identifying that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Well then, from that to another contemporary issue now, waste management. Alyssa, tell us how you're using AI.
Thanks, Seamus. It's so nice to see AI apply to such different fields, and our field in particular is waste management. So you might know from what you've seen in the news that we have a huge waste problem. We produce, 2 billion tons of solid waste a year. That's growing to 3.4 billion by 2050. Even with COVID, there's not a reduction in waste. It's just moved from sort of commercial to municipal waste, and the composition changes from less paper to more plastics and so on. And unfortunately, this massive, amount of waste, only globally 60% is going to uncontrolled landfill open dumps being leaked into nature, and only 14% is recycled. So this industry is huge, and I think it's quite niche. So maybe you don't think about it, but it's a $530 billion industry by 2025, and it's going through this massive shift where at the end of 2018, China, which accepted 90% of the West waste, said basically we're banning imports on the world's waste because you keep giving us trash and not high quality waste we can recycle. We're not going to be your dumping ground. So suddenly there's this urgent need to recycle better locally. Additionally, strict recycling targets from the government driven by consumer pressure. So 65% of waste should be recycled by 2035. Consumers are demanding big players like P&G, FMCG companies to produce recyclable, reusable packaging, which they've committed to do by 2030. So again, there's this huge energy around innovation and making recycling work better, more efficient. When we spoke to waste managers, so our team comes from an AI computer vision background, and we used to apply this for kind of more B2C use cases. Looking at waste management, a lot of sort of the inefficiencies that we see along the flow of waste is because they don't really have clear data information on the waste. There's high levels of contamination in the waste that they receive that causes problems in the facilities. Also currently, because of limitations of machine vision, traditional machine vision technology and the current sorting machines that they have, 30 to 40% of the labor within these recycling plants is still done manually. And that's from, someone stood at a table counting the composition of the waste. You might have a ton of waste coming in, and they'll take like a kilo sample and they'll count it to try and inform the plant how to function, to see, the quality of the bales that they're selling, to try and determine if there's any contaminants in there, because that gets sent to landfill if it's not recycled properly. So I think looking deeper into this, we realize that AI computer vision is amazing for these unpredictable environments. And It's not like your infrared camera that has a set IR signature and either you're this or that. And when you have a spread of different types of waste, like the incoming waste or the waste going to landfill, you really need AI computer vision to help label, characterize that level of unpredictability in such a complex environment. So concretely, how we're using AI computer vision is we put these camera boxes on top of conveyor belts with moving large flows of waste, and we automatically measure exactly what's on there. And this is a real-time kind of data dashboard that with information they've never seen before. And I really give it to this industry because like who runs a commodity business converting a product when you have no idea what's coming in? It could be more glass, more plastic today. COVID's changed the composition. Like how do you even dynamically adjust the machines when you don't have that information? And then also on the other end, it's a big risk for them because we work with a client where they produce kind of these bales of fiber that they sent to China for repurposing. Diapers were left in them. They got sent back. They got slapped with a 600,000 pound fine. But without this type of technology, how can you determine that contamination? So they've managed to operate without any data on composition, which is incredible and a feat to engineering and machine vision so far. But definitely we're applying our systems in the UK to measure sort of waste that's going to landfill. It's an environmental agency requirement, but also now the facility knows, okay, we have 1,000 counts of paper per minute. What's happening? Let's stop the facility. Let's see what we're losing to landfill. That's in the UK and Italy. We're looking at the PET line to see the impurities left within those plastics line because that determines pricing and whether it gets recycled. In Scotland, we're now looking at brand recognition on like SKU level per packaging. So how many Pepsi bottles does this get? Does this cardboard box for cereal, because it's laminate on one side, is that less recyclable? Can we feed that back to the waste producers? Can we inform EPR, extended producer responsibility scheme? And in South Korea, our system, our visual capability is now being embedded into their robotics to help automatically sort waste. So we focus on the vision, but we can also give that capability to machinery providers to sort waste at scale, essentially.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, a lot of use cases. I wish more people were in this industry. There's so many problems to solve.
There are, absolutely. And I think that's a very good use of AI there. So thank you very much, all of you, for that. Ben, ethics in medicine has always been particularly important, but in AI, it's coming out, it's emerging to be just as important, really. What advice would you give to a startup on the importance of ethical AI?
Thanks, Seamus.
An easy
question. Ethics is a huge issue, something we could discuss indefinitely. We could talk for weeks about ethics and all the individual issues you can get to. But I think advice I would give to a startup would be, if you're building a powerful and largely opaque system, which you probably are, hopefully, if you're a startup, you're building something powerful. And if you're using machine learning, often at the moment it is actually largely opaque. Then you need to think carefully about how it can fail or go wrong and what the consequences are if it does and how to mitigate it. That's kind of standard practice in engineering, which is my background. But when you come to release something out into the world, it's a much bigger world than if you're just releasing a B2B thing. If you're making a tool to go into a particular company, you can kind of have a good idea. You talk to the customer, you have a good idea of what the circumstances will be, and you can make a good estimate of what the consequences can be and how failures can happen. When you're releasing something into society, it can go anywhere in the world in all the possible circumstances, and it's just not possible that you will be able to think of all the possible things that could happen, the ways it could be used, the ways it could be misused, how it can go wrong. I kind of like to think, there's a man called Steve Blank. He gave some great advice for startups generally, which is along the lines of the answers are not in the building. And he was talking about if you want to solve problems for customers, you can't just sit there at your desk and think about it really hard. You have to go and actually talk to the customers because they know things that you don't. And I think that's great advice on ethics too. You go out and you get a range of opinions because people have spent their whole lives working on these kind of questions, whether ethics or AI and ethics. So yeah, I think going out and getting a broad range of opinions and views is really important. I think you might think because Antiverse is making predictions about molecules and not people, and we fit neatly inside existing drug safety and testing frameworks, then we wouldn't really have any ethics concerns. And actually, we probably have many fewer than a lot of AI companies, thankfully. But even so, early on, we met with an AI ethics committee. We found a range of pertinent questions to think about more deeply. So we're working on a particular disease. Well, who does that disease affect? We think we're working on this particular drug target molecule. Well, maybe that's not expressed in the whole population. Who is this medicine actually going to help most? Is it going to be widely effective? Is it going to be safe for everyone? Those are broader questions for the sort of medicine generally, but it was something that we had to think about as well. So we got out of the building and we asked.
That's excellent advice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martin, Ben briefly alluded to it in his answer there, but what is the black box problem that he was mentioning?
Well, yes, this is a particular challenge for us. So one of the things that I think our experience of AI has told us thus far is that you can know quite a lot about the process that AI is theoretically following in order to try and arrive at an answer. But in terms of exactly why, if you like, it's come up with a particular answer, that can be quite difficult to define. There are certain applications where it's apparent from the outputs as to whether it's working or not, and you can therefore satisfy stakeholders, customers, or whoever just through test results that the AI is being effective. Our challenge is a bit more subtle than that. So for example, if we are determining the value of particular bundles of intellectual property that companies own, when we do it using our kind of conventional data and algorithm based approach, there are essentially clearly structured rules. And we can explain what those rules are, and people can determine whether they're happy or unhappy with those rules. And therefore, if they're happy with the rules, they accept the outputs. When you're doing all of this really complex sort of deconstructed analysis and then putting through an AI engine, all of these different characteristics at once, it can be quite challenging. We've had quite a few discussions about this internally. How you explain what the model has really done and what you think about that, and how you build confidence in the fact that it will continue to be predictive beyond the test data that you're able to put through it. So I think that's how I would characterize our black box problem. It's essentially a problem of explainability. It's a proof that the predictiveness of the model is something that you can rely on. And that's difficult because the models are continually learning. So that's our challenge, I think. Okay.
Thanks very much for that. We've had a couple of audience questions, so I'll just farm them out briefly while we're here. Ben, back to our ethics for a second there. Are ethics committees generally pro AI, or are they a mix? How did you find them?
I wouldn't like to think of them as kind of characterize them as pro AI or against or a mix. I think they're generally pro ethics. You'd hope. But I think most of them are fairly pragmatic. They can see that AI can be of huge benefits in the world, that we probably can't get those benefits through other technologies at the moment. So it's a matter of, okay, here's a great potential tool. How can we accentuate the good and minimize the bad about it?
Okay, marvelous. That's good. Thank you. Yeah,
Martin, can I give you a different take on that?
Please do.
So one of the things that's been interesting me recently is what is considered patentable and where does AI stand in that? It's not quite an ethical issue, but it almost starts turning into one, because the law on patentability as it currently stands within the US and Europe and the UK is that the inventor on a patent has to be a natural person. And we're in the middle of a really interesting period where this is being tested through case law in order to understand whether there's a specific set of AI inventions, and they clearly were machine invented, are the subject of patent applications from the University of Surrey. And this is being tested in all of the major patent courts. At the moment, the view is AI cannot invent something to a standard acceptable to patentability because an AI machine is not a natural person. But I think all of the judges are kind of reserving their opinion as to whether that may be the correct interpretation of the current law, is the law actually correct, and is that position ultimately desirable? The opposite end of that spectrum is, theoretically, if you had a big enough machine and enough time, you could probably pre-invent using AI an awful lot of different things. In fact, there's already somebody out there who claims to have done that. So not quite ethics, but close to it, I think.
That's very, very interesting. Thank you. One of our audience questions pertains to how to get in contact with one of our panelists. So can we just go around the room and if I just run through you all, tell us how we can reach out to you if any of our audience members want to get in contact. Let's start with Ben. How do we reach Antiverse?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we have a website, antiverse.io, and you can email us at info@antiverse.io for any questions.
Marvelous. Thank you. Martin.
Info, I-N-F-O, @ingot.com, or have a look at our website.
Brilliant. Jeff? Oh, I'm afraid you're on mute, Jeff. Is that all right?
Yeah, I've just popped my email address into the chat box.
The audience won't be able to see our chat, so if you could vocally explain.
Okay, it's my email address is jeff.francis@breathemusic.co.uk, or go to LinkedIn and type in Jeff Francis, and hopefully see somebody like me there.
Marvelous. And Alyssa.
Alisa, ALISA, @greyparrot.ai. Grey parrot is in the bird.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So there are some more audience questions. So in no particular order, I'll start asking these. Alisa, can you explain a little bit more about the insights now available to waste managers thanks to AI?
Yeah, so the insights depend on where it is we place our analytics AI vision box. If we place it at the flow of incoming waste, we can let them know about the composition of what is coming from each council or each commercial site or municipal waste from different areas. And the insights that are gathered there are mainly to do with levels of contamination. Right now, there's a big mistrust between facilities, charging different sites because there's too much contamination. They have to send it to landfill. That's an extra cost. So providing some clearer pricing around, based on the quality of the waste coming in. And more importantly, really to give targeted education and feedback to residents within those areas about what they're doing wrong. Because right now there's no kind of feedback to the waste producers and to the councils. So that's for incoming stream of waste. Then we place our camera box on the different material lines. So you have the fiber line, the plastics line, the cans line. And there we're looking at how the machines are performing. Are there any impurities left in there? Are there any contaminants, any anomalies, which causes the facility to, that could break the machine, even hazardous objects. And then when we look at the line that's going out to landfill, which is double loss for the facility. So not only are they not capturing that value, they're paying for that to be taken to landfill or to incineration. So that last bit is also a lot to do with optimizing the facility. We're working with a plant right now where they're using the data on what they're losing to landfill to make investments. So finally, they know now in a year, we lose 50,000 pounds worth of cans. And because of that, we're going to invest in a hanging magnet because that's worth us investing in the long run. So overall, I think insights on waste composition, contaminants, as well as brand packaging, it basically helps the facility optimize their processes and the things that come with optimization. So save costs, increase revenue from more higher quality products, mitigate against risk, against sending contaminants with their product or having hazardous items in the facility, and then informing regulation as well, because the environmental agency looks very closely at the waste flows.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from an audience member, Steve Cochran, which I'm just going to quickly deal with myself, which is a question on open source algorithms and where to find them. Steve, my experience, there's nothing like making your own, but certainly to start with, my recommendation would be to look at places like OpenAI and the AI Gym. These are OpenAI in particular, massive in the field of open AI. That's kind of their role. In addition, Python, the programming language Python, has an awful lot of data science algorithms built into a lot of libraries. I could name them, but you've got scikit-learn, for example, is quite popular. If you sort of need any help with that, feel free to reach out. I can you can contact me through the portal. I have a profile on there. You can find me on LinkedIn. But certainly, I'd say there are innumerable sources out there. So that would be my recommendation there. Now, a sort of a question for you, Martin. The AI and its various subcategories deliver great potential for releasing business value. How do you and indeed the rest of the panel see AI being able to unlock the intangible assets business have?
So thanks for the question, Alex. I think the key area that I see being beneficial here is about dealing with very, very large and complex data sets. So doing the kind of thing that we have sought to do with part of the pattern universe, but applying that same sort of approach and discipline to other large and complex, difficult to interpret data sets. Particularly, I think, looking for characteristics that appear to be predictive of value. So one of the next things that I'd like to have a look at, intangibles are generally not traded independently of businesses because they're simply too valuable to the companies that own them. You know, if you have a portfolio of trade secrets, trademarks, designs, patents, confidential information, copyright, whatever it might be, you're not going to part with that because you won't have a business left if you do. So other ways have to be found in order to express that internal value and leverage it. Intangible assets do change hands all of the time whenever businesses as a whole are bought and sold. So my next target beyond patents is probably to look at how we apply artificial intelligence to information we can get on merger and acquisition activity in order to really kind of take out the intrinsic pieces that AI can help with, so that then all we have to fret about is the sort of circumstantial factors. I don't think you're going to ever get AI to explain why WhatsApp is worth over $19 billion to someone. But what you can do is to identify common factors in what shall we say more run-of-the-mill and less, shall we say, transactions that are probably less distorted by identifiable competitive factors, in order to make them usable for businesses who maybe aren't WhatsApps. Okay,
thank you very much. So an ethics question now, which I'll start with Ben, but we can go around the room. So China is steaming ahead. I'm just going to read this out now. Steaming ahead with AI. The EU and the US are playing catch up. That's the question. How does the panel feel, Ben? If we dwell too much on the ethics, do you think we will lose the race?
That's a really good question, and it's not an easy one. I think, of course, you can take it to one extreme and say, look, that's bad, and take it to another extreme and look, that's bad. And unfortunately, most of the sensible ground in the middle has arguments both ways. I'm not sure I would agree that the EU and the US are playing catch up with AI. But I think that kind of plays into a general question of where are your priorities? Do we want to get technology advanced at all costs? I think most people would be able to look at certain things that have been happening in China and say, we really don't want to go there. Thinking about treatment of certain ethnic groups, and that's been enabled by significant AI progress. But I'm not convinced that dwelling on ethics and thinking about what we're doing is really going to delay us that much. I think if we want to have a society where actually the AI is doing good things, then we need to do that kind of carefully. Otherwise, you risk all kinds of unintended consequences, and you might end up with a high-tech society where actually you don't really want to be there.
Okay, great answer. Anyone else from the panel want to express an opinion on that? That's all right. We'll move on. Simple answers. Alyssa, with your broad knowledge of the waste industry, is there anything that individuals should do or know that isn't being well communicated at present?
I'm so happy you asked that. I'm really passionate about this. I'll just say two things. So first, if you're not sure if it's recyclable or not, please don't put it into the recycling pack, because that could contaminate the whole load. I would more so put it into kind of the black bin or the kind of general waste bin if you're not sure. I think some of the main things people put in are things like tissues or plastic film, which isn't being recycled just yet. And also, this symbol, I don't know if you can see that, doesn't mean that this has been recycled or it's recyclable. This is the green dot, and it just means this producer has made financial contributions to recycling. So don't take that as this is recyclable. You know, sorry, I have many props, but like
that's all right,
this means it's recyclable. That doesn't mean anything. So if you don't see these signs or the more traditional triangle sign, please don't put it in the recycling bin.
Marvelous. Thank you very much for that. Jeff, a question for you now. AI is powerful, but it's only ever going to be as powerful as the computer hardware it runs on. Can you touch a little bit on quantum computing and how it's going to affect AI in the future?
Well, one question. I am a physicist, so I do understand quantum mechanics, although quantum computing is not really my bag. Although we do have a PhD developer on the team who has a PhD in quantum computing. Perhaps he should answer this question. I guess computer evolution is starting to run up against its physical limitations. So quantum computers solve problems in a fundamentally new way. And we hope that by taking this approach to computation, we'll be able to start exploring some problems that we can never solve in any other way currently. Depending on the complexity of your machine learning model, for instance, speed can be an issue with current computing. Some of our own neural networks training models, for example, are taking several weeks to train on a supercomputer. Machine learning is one research area, one direction where we are really hoping that, I guess, we're going to find key parts of the computational learning that can be speeded up significantly using quantum computing. In addition, unlike conventional silicon-based computing, overheating and energy use, which is a real concern with supercomputers, will not be a problem for quantum computing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much for that. We are coming up on our last 10 minutes, so we're into our last 15. So I encourage the audience, please feel free to post as many questions as you want now. Ben, a question for you. DeepMind recently made headline news with its developments in protein folding, but I imagine most people aren't completely aware of what that is. So can you tell us what is protein folding and why did it need AI to solve it? And why should we be excited about that?
Great. Yeah, another great question. Thanks. So proteins are the workhorses of biology. The vast majority of life, the process of biochemistry is done by proteins. Proteins can be, they can act as sensors in your body. They can act as enzymes to make chemical reactions happen. They make up structural scaffolding in your cells. They can even make a nanoscopic motor spinning around 100 RPM on your cell membrane. I think that's a kind of miracle in a way. But proteins are made of long strings of amino acids. They're just 20 little building blocks all strung together on a string. And they almost magically fold up into these 3D structures. And it's the 3D structure that determines what the protein does. But predicting what shape a protein is going to end up in just from that sequence of building blocks is something that we've been working on for decades, or scientists have been working on for decades, with a range of successes, but actually many failures. And where we are successful, it's generally within certain narrow ranges where we've done some experiments and we've got some idea what's happening already. It's an immensely complex problem and everything depends on everything else. Everything is floppy and flexible and context dependent. And that just means that computationally it's incredibly hard to get any traction with. And again, that's a great use case for machine learning. until now, the best way to find a protein structure has been to spend frustrating months and years doing unpredictable experiments. But DeepMind's AI made a splash. I mean, they first entered the competition 2 years ago, and they immediately took the lead, and everyone thought this is amazing. But then in December last year, the announcement was described, I think, as seismic and unprecedented, and turning the field upside down. So it was very big news for structural biology. And if you're an academic working on those problems, I think it was probably quite a traumatic month. But from the human standpoint and from the standpoint of biological industries, it's great. It could be the part of a dawning of a new age of medicine, where if we can predict the structure of every protein that we come across, or more or less every protein that we come across, that just enables so many more applications. I think in a way it's kind of like genomics. When we were able to start doing DNA sequencing, we didn't know exactly what it could be used for, but it's allowed the whole field to blossom. If it doesn't live up to the utopian kind of predictions that some people make, then at the very least, it'll be a huge boon to scientists and biotech companies everywhere, doing science faster and getting products out to people sooner.
Fantastic. That's really exciting. Thank you. Alyssa, a question for you now. You use computer vision to great effect. You've spoken about that now, but how do you actually teach an AI to see?
So a lot of that is, number one, having the right labeled data. And I didn't realize until I got into this field how much of that is actually deep learning work. It's just getting the data prepared. But really looking at sort of the quality of the annotated data. So we'll have images of waste on a conveyor belt. And one way is to get a labeling company to actually physically, someone puts a bounding box around this and says PET tray, or tin can or cardboard. And an easier way of that is on automated annotation, where we basically collect all of this, we put on the conveyor belt, and we tell the machine the next 1,000 items are PET trays or PET bottles. So once we have this kind of first step of labeled data, that fuels our AI recognition model to detect and characterize the objects. And we use a technique that our other panelists have spoken about, which is called deep learning. And it's basically models called neural networks, which are comprised of many layers that can be trained to learn how to make intelligent decisions from known samples. So you might have seen those kind of bubbles, not complex metrics, but essentially, you know, the first layer might be to identify dark and light pixel values. And then the second is identifying the edges. Then third is identifying the features. And then finally, it's identifying a combination of these features to spit out an answer, which is hopefully correct and accurate and done in a way that's fast. And also what we're working a lot on is data efficiency. So instead of, you know, labeling 2,000 or 20,000 images of this in various kind of, you know, manipulations, to kind of cut that down to 2,000 images. So when we come to learn a new object, we need less labeled data.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. There's a question here now on something called JTP3, which I'll just briefly explain for those in the audience who haven't heard of it. OpenAI, I mentioned before, recently came out with a product called JTP3. It's not yet commercially available, but it is available for applications for people to essentially try it out. It has made quite a lot of news down to primarily its seeming ability to take in very little data, mostly in the form of documentation, and very quickly learn what it should be doing with that, whether it be giving you answers, summarizing, or you know, creating documents of its own. But the question here is, does the panel think we'll ever have a general AI? And it's a very big and broad question, I know. So let's go around the room and have a brief answer on that from everybody. So Jeff, how do you feel about that? Do you think we'll ever have a general AI?
Well, that's a good question. I've been following sort of the, you know, the work by sort of the futurist Ray Kurzweil over the years, and he predicts I think I was reading recently the prediction, the year keeps changing. He predicts there'll be something called a technological singularity in about 2042, I think, and that point is where computers will sort of be able to invent themselves and, you know, really achieve sort of what humans can do and a lot more. So it's a bit of a frightening sort of utopic sort of uh, era, a journey, I think, that we're not very far away from. So, yeah, in terms of, there's so much happening. So my work involves lots of data, training data, so what we call supervised learning. And the move, I suppose, is to go to just like DeepMind, in the unsupervised area where you don't need training, or you don't need much data. The system will learn from its own complexity. So, potentially in terms of, if you add together, some new paradigms that will be coming in the next certainly decades, of quantum computing and the way we understand AI, because a lot of deep learning, for instance, is extremely accurate, but we still don't have that explainability. So if you're in life sciences, explainability is really important. So if you're using like decision trees and natural language processing, you can explain that to a degree. But when you get to neural networks, it's a lot more difficult to explain. So in terms of a general, I think it's certainly possible. Probably about, maybe around Ray Kurzweil's prediction of, into the 40s. I think there'll be some exciting but disturbing things happening.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Alyssa, same question. How do you feel? Do you think we'll ever achieve a general AI?
I'm such a fan of like sci-fi, and I would love that to be real, but I'm a bit skeptical, and I think, in the next 100 years, I don't see that happening. So no. But I do think it's sort of our responsibility to also kind of demystify some of that, and the kind of, AI will take over all our jobs. I think these are things, as a community, we have a responsibility to sort of communicate clearly on the value of AI, how it, the positive impact of AI, and also kind of demystify some of these scares.
Thank you. Martin, then, how about you? General AI, yay or nay?
Not soon, maybe not never. But to be honest, I think I'm too much of a newcomer to the subject matter to be 100% sure what the implications of that would be. As long as general doesn't mean military general, it might not be so terrible, but we'll see.
That's a very, very good statement. Ben, then, how about yourself?
I think it's difficult. I find myself kind of almost split. Sometimes I think about it and think it's kind of inevitable, and sometimes, or relatively within our lifetime, inevitable. And sometimes I think, looking at AI currently from a technical point of view, I think we're so far away from what looks like intelligence that it feels like an unbridgeable gap. But I think one of the problems is that no one can really define intelligence at the moment. So one of the tropes of AI is, oh, well, we just define intelligence as what the computers can't do yet. So it's like a moving target. And I think in general, the closer you get to some kind of ill-defined goal, the more obvious it is that you don't really know what you're looking for in the first place. So if I tell you to go to New York, that's fine until you get to New York and you go, well, which bit of New York? Like, New York isn't just one single point, it's a whole spread out area. And I think probably it's true that any particular thing, that individual task that humans can do, probably will be able to teach an AI to do. But does that mean they're intelligent? I don't know.
That's a very, very good point. I think we're coming to the end now, so I'll add my own little 10 cents to this. I kind of more or less, this is going to sound very wishy-washy, but I kind of agree with everyone. I think that I think that we are certainly headed towards something that I would probably categorize as a singularity. I think when that occurs, I think, is a big question. But I think there's been a lot of trends that you can track over the last few decades that really show huge progression that only is going to get faster, and that will, I think, lead to massive changes. But I think those changes will be very, very similar to the smartphone. They may come along a lot faster, But you know, when the smartphones, when mobile phones, for that matter, first came out, a lot of people were concerned about what they were and how they worked and could they hurt us. And you know, I think there's a really good anecdote actually about the microwave, about how when microwaves first developed, people would stand in front of them and watch things being microwaved because it was novel, but unfortunately because they weren't shielded, they got burned. I think this is exactly the same thing. I think we learn by doing. I think we learn by releasing these things into the world and seeing what happens. But I think we've also learned from our past to a great extent. And I think all this conversation we're having now about things that are coming is very sort of a positive reflection of the fact that we tend to in the past to talk about things that only as they arrived. So I think we're aware of the potential downfalls. I think we're aware of the risks. We obviously can't be aware of all the risks, but I think that will have a massive effect on the direction that this thing travels in as we go into the future, and the way that this is implemented. I mean, we're already having conversations about ethics now. You know, we're already aware of the concerns of military applications of AI, and I think that will continue. I don't think that will diminish. So yeah, I'm optimistic myself. I think as to a general AI, I think I'm inclined to agree with Ben. I think general will only get muddier as time goes on rather than clearer. And I think to the end, we'll just end up agreeing that when something talks back to us and has its own thoughts, we can probably call that intelligence. How it does that, we don't really mind. But that's me. So we are out of time now. It is 11:30. Thank you very much to this excellent panel who've been rather eloquent in discussing all these issues. And thank you very much for our audience for attending. Enjoy the rest of Emerging Tech Fest. This is the last day, of course, but enjoy it. You can revisit any of the panels or events through the portal, and have a wonderful day. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining the Emerging Tech Fest. Join us again on our virtual live sessions, or watch us on playback anytime, anywhere.